Stop making noise in the kitchen.
Quiet on set. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm pulling up some quotes and I'm just asking for a little bit more behind it.
Okay.
Okay? You are free to love without an agenda.
Well, I think it's true. You're free to love without an agenda. A lot of people don't even know what that means. How do you love without an agenda? An agenda would be the same word probably as an expectation at that point. We're free to love without an expectation. And I think for love to be truly love, there can't be an expectation. To have one is some sort of power play, and it's not other-centered.
What would that look like in a let's say a marriage?
Boy, in a marriage that's tough because I'm in one. So, what does it mean for me to love without an agenda? One way I can put it, and let me take it out of a marriage context, because I can immediately think of one with my kids. It is to not, and this is tough, it is not to play the Holy Spirit in their lives, it is to trust the Holy Spirit in their lives. So I don't relate to them with an underlying fear, where I'm trying to convince them of a choice they need to make so that I'm not so freaked out. And I've done this. The last time I did this was a couple years ago during the pandemic. And my daughter was pregnant, and I started reading stuff. And this is part of the problem with reading articles and listening to the news and all this, because it's loaded with fear cells. And I started to read articles about why it's so important for pregnant women to get the vaccine. I'm a missionary kid. I've been shot with every kind of vaccine on the planet, and but now I don't want to admit that I'm fearful, because that doesn't sound good. So I'm concerned. I'm a concerned father. Such BS. And so I read it, and I get more and more concerned. And she happens to be in the swimming pool with her husband just a few feet away. And I just go out to talk to them, no agenda. Just go out to talk to them with no agenda. And wouldn't you know it, the conversation happens to turn to why it's so important for a pregnant woman to get a vaccine. Wouldn't you know that? It must have been God. The God of fear. And if I'd been honest, I would have said, I'm kind of freaking out. I don't want to go to this imaginary funeral where there's two caskets, a little one and a big one. But I wasn't honest. I wasn't a truth teller in that moment. Fear always drives away from being a truth teller and into some imagination that doesn't exist. And so I try to convince her through information of why she needs to take the vaccine. I'm getting more and more frustrated because she isn't listening to me. And she said, Dad, I just don't sense that this is right for me. And did I listen to her? No. I have an agenda. I'm trying to save her life. And so I finally turn to her husband and I say, this is your baby too. Why don't you do something about this? I look back at my daughter and tears are just streaming down her face. And did that wake me up? No. For another half an hour, I'm thinking about how justified I am. And at least I warned them, so if they die, it's not my fault. And about 30 minutes later, I was inside the house and I had a come to Jesus meeting with Jesus, And what I hear in my heart is, Paul, you are such an ass. And as soon as I hear it, I know it's true. And I had to go out and ask for their forgiveness. And I thought, my gosh, why do I do this? Why do I treat strangers better than I treat my own daughter? Because I don't try to enforce agendas on them, not anymore. I used to when I was trying to save everybody. But here I am with one of the most precious people in my life, and I'm trying to love with an agenda. I don't trust the Holy Spirit in her, so I'm wanting to play the Holy Spirit in her. It's taken me a long time to let go of my fears that are tied to imagination, tied to the depth of my relationships. That's a few years ago now. It doesn't mean that it will be the last time, but man, I haven't now with any of my kids for a couple of years. And that's a win. So yeah, this is learning how to love without an agenda. And when you let go of the agenda, you really begin to love well.
Jesus was always challenging the dogma of religion. So it's not like I'm out there by myself.
The only reason that Jesus was attacking the dogma of religion is because he loved those both caught in that dogma and those who taught that dogma. And it was about love that he responded. He had no agenda to stop the dogma of religion. He was just the presence of love. And when he ran up against dogma, or he ran up against other things that were inhibiting people from being fully human and fully alive, he went after it. And when it was wrapped into a person's soul, he was really gentle about it. For those who are being harmed by it overtly, when it was wrapped into a person's soul and they got their identity from it, he wasn't so gentle, but he was always loving. When he went after the Pharisees, who were the purveyors of dogma that was putting people into bondage, he was very confrontive. And you could look at what his confrontation was and says, see, there he wasn't loving. No. He is after the scribes and the Pharisees, who were highly respected, but what they were teaching was putting human beings into bondage. And yet, he communicated that confrontation in such a way that those who heard it, if they had ears to hear, knew that it was a loving thing. And Nicodemus, who was a chief of, the Pharisaical community, he then shows up to Jesus in the middle of the night. Why would he do that if he thought that this was just spewing of antagonism and hate? He wouldn't have. But he knew he was being loved, and he needed to find out more. And that's what we see in the character and nature of Jesus, who is a revelation of the character and nature of God, is that everything he did was an expression of that love.
I love this. Can you, for those who have not read the book,
The Shack?
seen the movie,
Okay.
the book and the movie, I am especially fond of you.
Yeah, I'm especially fond of you. That changes it. When I say I love you, the subject is I, right? I love you. When you say I'm especially fond of you, now it's about you. And it was such a surprise to me how deeply that impacted people. Because when somebody said I love you, it's like you're just part of a group of people whom I love. I'm especially fond of you. There's a uniqueness to the you. It's the same as sort of, I see you. I see you. I'm not seeing anybody else. And I love you could be the same as that, but it's not how we hear it. So man, I'm especially fond of you. The uniqueness, the ways that you do things, how you look at the world, your sense of humor. It's you, right? And I love that too. It was a surprise to me, but a good one.
Okay, so the initiatives,
Yeah.
our tagline is a bit of time
And
and
a
a lot
lot of
of
relationship.
relationship. And the full quote is, life takes a bit of time and a lot of relationship. Where does that come from?
I don't know. It came from my experience. You could say it took a lot of time too. A lot of time and a lot of relationship. But in comparison to the values, and when I look at it, it wasn't the time that mattered, it was the relationships that mattered. And so it was a bit of time, but it was a lot of relationship. We are designed for relationship. You can't come to wholeness apart from relationship. We don't get better in isolation. We have to take the risk of relationship. We have to learn how to trust. You can't love in a vacuum. And yeah, it takes time. But it really takes a lot of relationship.
Two quotes.
Okay.
The world in many ways would be much calmer and gentler place if women ruled.
Okay.
There would have been fewer children sacrificed to the gods of greed and power. The next one says, thank goodness there are women in our lives. That's all I can say. We get saved by the women in our lives. Women don't have too good of a spot in the Bible and in Christianity, and there seems to be a lot of, some would say there's a lot of misogyny. There's a lot of struggle with subservient role and everything. How do you feel about women in the Bible, in the story, their place within religion? What kind of impact have they made?
Golly. That's a great question. And it's a long conversation, all right? Because it's like opening a door into a vast landscape. In general, as a general statement, the movement of the place of women throughout the Hebrew scriptures and into the New Testament is an unfolding good shift. There's a fighting against the systems that are in place, that are dominated by men, controlled by men, and frankly, in a lot of religious contexts, still are. But there is a rising freedom. It breaks my heart how long it's taken. And it really pisses me off. My first issue with the church tradition that I was part of was over the issue of women. Because I looked, and it didn't make sense. Because I come from overseas. If you took the women out of the church overseas, it would completely collapse. And so you're dealing with women in leadership, women in positions of power outside the United States and Canada, and you come here, and all of a sudden they have no voice. I have a friend who came from Mexico where women had absolutely the same authority as men in her Christian religious background. And then she comes here to the enlightened, West, and suddenly she can't do anything. She's not allowed to do it. The men who have set the boundaries don't believe that she can do it, that she has some lesser ability to hear the Holy Spirit than they do. And this goes back. When I say that the world would be a kinder, gentler place, women have a bond to children that men have to learn, right? A woman who has a baby in the womb is tied to that baby in a way that the men around her are not. It is one of the most beautiful gifts, I think, that God has given women who are placed under bondage, not placed by God, but by men, as if they had nothing to offer. And we have a daughter who just had a 30-week-old baby in her womb, a little baby boy, die a few weeks ago. That bond is so incredible. Women, if they were healthy, would not be sending their babies out to fight wars if they were not under the influence of a dominating male culture. Eve was healthier than Adam. And this is my midrash, my way of looking at the Genesis story. Because she is the one given the promise. Adam is the one who's escorted out. Adam is the one who's turned his face away. Adam is the one who deceived her. The first not good is not about the fruit and that scenario. The first not good is about Adam being in a separation. How he's already turned from God as the source of life. And then God calls him back by looking at the animals. Is there a face-to-face here? No. So I'll bring one out that will be face-to-face. If you don't want to look at me face-to-face, look at her face-to-face. And the warning to her is, if you turn, teshuka, in the Hebrew, epistrophe in the Greek, if you turn to him, he'll rule over you. And that is a warning. But to you I'm giving the promise that you will give birth to one who will crush the head of this accusation. And what did her turning entail? She thought she was going to give birth to the Messiah. She cries out when she gives birth to Cain, I've begotten a man-child, the Lord. Not with the help of. The Hebrew is really clear. I've begotten a man-child, the Lord. Because she thought she was bringing into being the one who would crush the accusation. Which Mary then did centuries later. Apart from the will of a male and apart from the flesh of a male. John. And it doesn't mean that women can't be all twisted up and broken, but a lot of times that breaking has come because of the men who are in her existence. And some of it's now genetic and some of it is epigenetic and all that kind of stuff. So I stand by what I've said. The world would be a kinder, gentler place if women were in charge. We wouldn't be so apt to build these monster weapon conglomerates and, or to come into a culture and slaughter the people, slaughter the babies of women. And I think there is a lot less misogyny in the overall movement between what has happened because of the dominance of men and the liberation. There is so much credit given to women in the New Testament. Yeah, it's not perfect, but the movement is definitely toward the freedom of women. And I don't buy into this, complementarian stuff. I just think that's a different form of misogyny. I believe that women are absolutely and fundamentally equal in capacity, equal in ability to men. Without a doubt and without question and without saying you have your place, we have our place, which is misogyny as far as I'm concerned. When her turning happened, what did she turn to him for? Identity, worth, value, significance, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, community, and love. What did Adam turn toward? The ground and the works of his hands. He looks to what he produces. For what? Identity, worth, value, significance, security, meaning, purpose, destiny, community, and love. But she at least turned to a relationship. He turned to the ground and the works of his hands. And for him to return, which is the call of the gospel in the Hebrew scriptures and in the New Testament, returning means he's not only got to turn back to a relationship in general, but back to face one with God. She only had to turn from a relationship to God. Now she can make relationship idolatry too. But she will love her baby more than she will love production and performance. Unless she's convinced by a world dominated by men that should be the value. And, you go through times in history where they kind of get convinced of that for a while, but it doesn't last. There's something about the cry of a tiny baby, whether in Bethlehem or whether in your own arms, that changes everything.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's really wonderful. Woo!